Hello, everybody. Welcome. Took us a minute to get settled in. Hopefully, we'll make it worth your wait. I am Matt Brim. I'm the executive director of CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies. And I just want to welcome you to the 2023 David R. Kessler Lecture and Award Ceremony. Yeah. I'm so happy to welcome everybody here on behalf of CLAGS, to welcome you, including my students from the College of Staten Island, to the Graduate Center. Yes. And welcome to CUNY, the City University of New York. For all of those in the Proshansky Auditorium, where we are live, for all of those on the webinar, hopefully you're able to hear and see us now. Welcome. To extend his own welcome to the Graduate Center, I'm so happy to introduce the interim president of the Grad Center, Dr. Josh Brumberg.
Let me add my welcome. Thanks, Matt. I feel honored that the Center for LGBTQ Studies, the oldest university-based center of this kind, has asked CUNY's newest president to say a few words. As a public university, the Graduate Center and its associated Advanced Science Research Center are committed to the idea that our scholarship has a role in advancing the public good. Before touching on tonight's event, as many of you know, the Graduate Center is a national leader in graduate education at the master's and especially the doctoral levels. It is the home of innovative research and creative works of Nobel, Guggenheim, and Pulitzer Prize winners. We are one of the largest PhD granting institutions in the country, and we are especially proud to rank among the country's top 10 institutions in awarding doctorates to students from underrepresented groups. I am confident in saying that no other graduate school in the country takes more seriously its public responsibilities or its mission to advance knowledge for the public good. The Graduate Center is not just a place dedicated to advanced education and research. It is also a laboratory of ideas, which delivers the finest research and scholarship to and far beyond the 5 boroughs. Each year, our doctoral students teach more than 130,000 undergraduates at the City University of New York, bringing the very best research and learning from the seminar room into the classroom. Tonight's 31st annual David R. Kessler Award exemplifies these ideals. It is my privilege to congratulate this year's recipient, Dr. E. Patrick Johnson, as well as to thank in advance Professor Roderick Ferguson, Professor Kathy Cohen, and Professor George Chauncey for their testimonials. I hope that you will make a habit of attending our public programs, lectures, and events, whether in person or online. In closing, I wish everyone a happy and healthy holiday season, starting tonight with Hanukkah. Thank you.
President Brumberg, we really appreciate your support. Thanks so much for being here tonight. We are here tonight to celebrate and to learn from our guest of honor, E. Patrick Johnson. We'll get to the learning in a little bit, but let's just start the evening, and we'll have our formal awards ceremony later tonight. But let's start the evening, everyone, by congratulating the 2023 Kessler Award winner, E. Patrick Johnson. We could not be giving this award to a kinder, more brilliant, more influential scholar. It is an honor to have you here with us, E. Patrick. The Kessler Award is for sustained achievement and contributions to the field of LGBTQ studies, art, or activism. And this is the 31st year that we've given this award. We are especially appreciative to have E. Patrick here, who has spent decades making this moment possible. It's a moment where we get to smile and to celebrate, and that is especially welcome in these very difficult times that we're having right now. So thank you for that. Thanks to our Graduate Center friends who helped make this night possible, people in facilities and IT, people in communications and marketing, the caterers. If you wait long enough, you'll get some great food at the end of the night. Thanks to everybody who contributed materially and in spirit. You'll hear more about CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies, in a little bit, but I just want to start by telling you in a nutshell what our mission is. Our mission is to bring free, public LGBTQ studies to everyone, because everyone deserves it. You deserve it no matter where or whether you went to college. You deserve it whether this is your first Kessler lecture or your 31st Kessler lecture. You deserve whether you can help us by giving back a little bit tonight, or whether you can do that down the road. There's absolutely no reason for CLAGS to be here except to provide knowledge in the service of you and in the service of the liberation of all people. It is our honor to do that. Thank you for helping us by being here. I want to take a moment to remember two very special people who held our mission dear and who made our work more possible. This is David Kessler. David Kessler gave his name to this award. He died last November, and we weren't able to memorialize him at the last Kessler, so we want to now. Dr. Kessler was a psychiatrist, and when he was asked by the founder of CLAGS, Martin Duberman, to endow a lectureship in LGBTQ studies in 1991, he was delighted to do so. He trusted CLAGS to both reflect and to shape the burgeoning field of gay and lesbian studies as it was known at the time. And nothing has made us prouder than living up to that responsibility that his lectureship placed on us. We do so again tonight in honoring E. Patrick Johnson. So thank you to David R. Kessler for the legacy that you've helped us create. And those are the 30 Kessler winners that have been previous to tonight. CLAGS also mourns the loss of our dear friend, 2018 Kessler Award winner, Amber Hollibaugh. Amber believed deeply in queer intellectual work, and she knew that that work happens in the academy and in places beyond it, which are, of course, most intellectual places. She taught us that for people living on the sexual margins, for immigrants, for class outsiders, for people like me living with HIV, for sex workers, as well as for people who are more easily seen and heard and listened to, she taught us that for all of us, desire is an important key to knowing. CLAGS and your many queer class communities will miss you very much, Amber. But we still have Amber's words, and we have the words of all of our Kessler lecturers. We're so happy to celebrate something else tonight, too. The Feminist Press has published 2 new volumes that collect the Kessler lectures from the first one in 1992 all the way up to 2020. The 2 volumes are Queer Ideas and Queer Then and Now. Queer Ideas is a republication with a new foreword, and that collects the first decade of Kessler lectures, starting with Joan Nessel's Kessler lecture in 1992. And the second volume, edited by our wonderful CLAGS board members, Debanuj Dasgupta, Joseph Donega, and Margot Weiss, collects the lectures from 2002 all the way up to 2020. Thank you to the Feminist Press for being a long-standing collaborator and friend with CLAGS. They have a table out front, and so you can actually buy these 2 books. If you do that, you will get some swag, a cute little CLAGS tote bag. It's mesh on the back, and we were saying this looks like a 1990s like gay man's pride shirt because it's like. But if you buy a book, we'll put it in this and send it home with you. thanks to the Feminist Press, publisher Margot Atwell and editor Lauren Hook, and Nadine Santoro is here too. So we appreciate your friendship and your collaboration. And finally, if Patrick, you'll indulge us, we have one more pre-celebration to get to. I'm very excited tonight to announce, excuse me, the launch of CLAGS 2023-26 capital campaign called A Different Legacy. Now, a capital campaign is meant to raise money to achieve a few clear goals and also to make the organization CLAGS sustainable into the future. So to explain our campaign and its impetus and its goals, we prepared something very special for you tonight.
CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies, is the first university-based research center in the United States dedicated to the study of historical, cultural, societal, and political issues that are of vital concern to gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer individuals and communities. We are proudly located at the Graduate Center of City University of New York, the nation's largest urban public university. For over 3 decades, CLAGS has offered LGBTQ scholarship to the public. We have hosted and co-hosted over 1,000 events attended by many thousands of people from all around the world. Now is the time to imagine the future of CLAGS.
To advance the center's public mission of making and sharing queer knowledge, we're launching A Different Legacy, our 2023-2026 LGBTQ Studies Capital Campaign. A Different Legacy will raise $500,000 over the next 3 years. We will use your donation to develop and support free and innovative programming and host groundbreaking conferences, including a state-of-the-field conference in queer and trans of color studies and queer class relations.
We are launching CLAGS Research Archive at the Graduate Center's Mina Reese Library. The archive will preserve CLAGS past and future material histories and will be available to everyone.
We will invest in the future generation of queer and transgender studies scholars by awarding fellowships and prizes to students, early career academics, and public intellectuals. And we will continue to honor groundbreaking scholars, artists, and activists who have made major contributions to queer studies and queer communities.
Your donation to A Different Legacy will have an immediate impact at this important time for CLAGS. We receive a fraction of our budget from our host institution, so we truly need your support to become fully self-sustaining.
Our work is especially urgent in times when extremist voices call for the erasure of queer and trans studies, as well as Black studies. With your donation to CLAGS, you can help us show the world that understanding, not hate, is the future.
Hi, I'm Matt Brim, Executive Director of CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies at the CUNY Graduate Center. It is my privilege to ask you to help us by contributing to our new capital campaign, A Different Legacy. At CLAGS, we truly cherish small donations from friends who can't afford to give much, yet give to us. We also want to create a new model for legacy giving in higher education, where donor attachments to equity inspire generosity. This is the queer future you can help us build at CLAGS. So please go to our website, clags.org, and donate to A Different Legacy.
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 A Different Legacy at CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies. Thank you. I love this for so many reasons. Is Nicole Marquez here? Nicole. So Nicole Marquez was our intern, our media intern at CLAGS. Nicole is earning her master's right now in the Women's and Gender Studies program at the CUNY Graduate Center, which is one of the only WGS master's programs in the area. Headed by Donna Davis. It's one of the most exciting things I think that's happening at the Graduate Center. Anyway, Nicole is a filmmaker and she wanted to do an internship. And so she made this for free for us, right? Right next to free. And you know, and so we had fellows, all these young people. I'm by far the oldest people in that video. All of these young people involved in CLAGS gave their time, their afternoons, they memorized lines. Some of us are not very good actors. Some of us are better actors. But this was a real DIY project. And so I want to say that because I want you to know that CLAGS stretches every dime that we have. But I also want you to know that CLAGS can't do everything we do for free. So tonight, when I ask for your support, I'm going to ask for your material support, and that means your support that will help us reach our goals. Everybody in the audience tonight got a postcard inserted in your program, and it gives some information about how to give, but it also lists the goals that we're going to achieve over the next 3 years. But I'm also asking your support of our vision of a different legacy. And this is a future for queer and trans studies based not on legacies of class exclusion, legacies of racial privilege, legacies of disparate gender outcomes. At CLAGS, we want to turn the concept of legacy giving that has been so much in the news in the last couple years in a really negative way. We want to turn the concept of legacy giving on its head so that, to repeat, it's a commitment to equity, not exclusion, not elitism, that drives generosity. So you can give in a couple ways. You can go to the QR code on the postcard, or if you're at home, we enlarge the QR code. You can just take a picture with your camera and it will take you to our giving page. You can go to CLAG's own webpage, hosted at the GC, clags.org, and you'll see a donate button near the top. You can send a check. If you send a check, there's a very specific way to make out this check. You make it out to the Graduate Center Foundation, and in the memo, you put for CLAGS. Or at the reception, when you're eating and you're drinking a little bit, you'll see a little white cardboard box that says donations on it. And that cardboard box has been at CLAGS for a couple decades. Talk about stretching a dime, right? We use the same little white donation box, so we take cash, is what I'm saying. We had a former ED of CLAGS. His name is Kevin Nadal. Kevin, by the way, is the first Filipino distinguished professor in the CUNY system. So congratulations to Kevin Nadal. Not only is Kevin brilliant, but Kevin has a magic gift. Kevin, when he was ED, could stand up here in front of audience and he could say, I need 10 people to give me $500 in the next 15 minutes. And they would do it. Well, I'm not Kevin, but hopefully Kevin's ghost is in the room. He's not dead, he's around. And maybe Kevin's in the room. Kevin, if you're in the room, come. But I do know that statistically speaking, some people in this room and some people on the webinar are low. It's also true that most of us aren't loaded. And so I want you to know that we cherish $10 donations as much as we cherish $500 donations. And we thank you, and we really need the money. But beyond the money, we thank you for your support of our vision of a different legacy. And with that aside, we've done my hard work for the evening, and now it's time to learn. It's time to be introduced to E. Patrick Johnson, as is our Kessler custom. We have 3 testimonial speakers who will introduce our award winner, Rod Ferguson, Kathy Cohen, and George Chauncey. It should come as no surprise, given E. Patrick's concept of Quare studies, that these scholars have been at the very forefront of thinking about just the kinds of queer class relations that CLAGS is so invested in. So we thank them for being here. Introducing these speakers will be our 2 board chairs at CLAGS, Laura Westengard and James Harris, who you met a little bit already. and board member Margot Weiss. And so as I asked James to come up, as he makes his way up, I just want to say one more time, thank you so much for being here tonight to help celebrate E. Patrick and his wonderful work. We hope to see you at CLAGS future events. All of our events are free and open to the public. We do this for you. It's the only reason we exist. And thanks so much for your support, both material and spiritual, for a different legacy. Thanks for being here tonight.
Like literally sweating, like watching myself on video was wild. It's fine. It's fine. Deep breaths. Because I'm James Harris. I'm one of the board co-chairs at CLAGS, and it is a thing I love to do. I'm also an assistant professor of English at the Bronx Community College, part of the City University of New York. And I have been given like the exciting, but like kind of unenviable task of introducing Roderick Ferguson. And I say unenviable because like when I went to grad school, Roderick Ferguson was like, it was the name, right? Like that was like, oh, you're doing Ferguson, like it's Ferguson. Like it was like, it's a person you know by last name. So like if I were sitting there with my grad school cohort being like, I'm gonna introduce Roderick Ferguson, they'd be like, girl, shut up. And so like tonight is a story about maybe missed connections, because I had this opportunity in the past. My incredible advisor, Martin Joseph Ponce, who if you hang around in CLAGS, you will get the chance to see this spring at Queer Color, Transit Color, invited me to come. We at Ohio State, I'm sorry, the Ohio State University, where I did my PhD work, had a giant symposium on queer color, transit color studies that was in honor of the work of Samuel Stewart. And Roderick Ferguson was one of the keynote speakers, and he was invited to come, and he was amazing. And part of having him be there was like, well, I mean, we got Roderick, we gotta like really take advantage of it. We gotta have him do all the things, like workshops and like dinners, and like we need him to meet the people. And so my advisor was like, you should come to this dinner. And I was a grad student, so do I check my emails? And so so at some point, like I was sitting in the audience of this thing, and I was big mad that nobody had invited me to do anything. And then I did just like scroll through my email, and I saw it, and then no one was looking. And so you can now experience the face that I made when I finally realized that, oh, they did email me about this. And that was on me. And so I think this is a lesson in two things. My grad student cohorts, check your emails. Just check. Right now, just do it right now. Whatever you're doing right now, just stop and check, because there's something in there you're missing and it's important. And also, and this is a thing that I take as like a real lesson, right? The time is always right to do right. And so it is in that spirit that I get to introduce you to someone you already know. It's Roderick Ferguson. It's Dr. Roderick A. Ferguson, who's the William Robertson Coe Professor of Women's Gender Studies and African American Studies at Yale University. He's the author of One Dimensional Queer, We Demand, the University and Student Protests, The Reorder of Things, the University and its Pedagogies of Minority Difference, and Aberrations in Black, Toward a Queer of Color Critique. He's the co-editor with Grace Hong of the anthology Strange Affinities, The Gender and Sexual Politics of Comparative Racialization, and he's the co-editor with Erica Edwards and Jeffrey Ogbar of Keywords in African American Studies. He's the 2020 Kessler recipient, and he's back to introduce a good friend, Dr. Roderick Ferguson.
All right, thank you, James. It's okay, we're together now. All right. December 7th, 2023, dear E. Patrick, San Diego, winter 2000, you came over to my apartment with Chandan Reddy. He had just seen you give a brilliant talk at UC San Diego and wanted us to meet. I knew what was going on in his head at the time. Rod, there's this Black queer scholar that we have to hang out with. And so we took you to our favorite Korean place on Convoy. I remember how on the ride there, how familiar you felt to me. No surprise, since we both grew up as Black, working class, sissy boys in the South. I recall you telling us that if this academic thing didn't work out, you were thinking about opening a restaurant. Really, we asked? And then you turned and looked at us with that stop you in your tracks look that Black people are wont to give and declared, I cook. It was not until some years later that I would have the benefit of your cooking in the kitchen, but in the meantime, you cooked up a storm in terms of scholarship. There was the Black Queer Studies Conference that you co-organized with the theorist, Mae Gwendolyn Henderson, at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in April of 2000. The conference boasted of intellectuals and artists such as M. Jackie Alexander, Jennifer DeVere Brody, Kathy Cohen, Cheryl Clark, Cheryl Dunye, Thomas Glave, Jewel Gomez, Philip Bryan Harper, Thomas Allen Harris, Juanima Lubiano, Charles Rowell, Ronaldo Walcott, Yvonne Welbon, and others. In her article about the event, Jennifer Brody begins by describing Juanima Lubiano's closing remarks. Quote, in her stunning, breathlessly delivered comments, Professor Lubiano argued for the value of praxis makes perfect. Her refined redefinition of the common sense phrase, practice makes perfect, by making fungible the privileged term, replacing mere practice with the Marxist-inflected praxis, she queered the quotation of quotidian logic and emphasized the way in which the work of the conference and its workers, quote, transformed the existing world, making something different, additional, end quote. We might think of your first book, Appropriating Blackness, Performance, and the Politics of Authenticity, as the precursor to transforming existing worlds to make something different and additional. There you argue against the stability of Blackness and observe its flexibility and instability. You problematize Blackness as a site of appropriation and essentialization. Recall that Pilate in Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon had a similar argument when she said, you think dark is just one color, but it ain't. There are 5 or 6 kinds of black, some silky, some woolly, some just empty, some like fingers, and it don't stay still. It moves and changes from one kind of black to another. And in the spirit of Pilate, you showed us how in performance, Blackness slips and slides and moves at the margins. Baked into that book was the observation that queerness and Black queer studies are ways of propelling and observing the changing same of Blackness. In the 2005 volume, Black Queer Studies, a critical anthology, you and Henderson went on to offer that book as the textual embodiment of the North Carolina Conference. But more importantly, you activated the beginnings of a field. You and Henderson made clear that if we were to create the world of Black queer studies, it would necessarily have to be an extension of the work of Black feminism. You wrote, quote, given the status of women and class not lagging too far behind within Black studies, it is not surprising that sexuality, and especially homosexuality, became not only a repressed site of study within the field, but also one with which the discourse was paradoxically preoccupied, if only to deny and disavow its place in the discursive field of Black studies, end quote. In other words, Black queer studies would have to mobilize the familial but firm confrontational quality that Black feminism has always deployed with Black studies, that one hand on the hip, finger-wagging pose taught to us by grandmamas, aunties, mamas, and mothers, a posture that in the context of intellectual formations is used for critical interventions. You have taken many projects out of your oven, and forgive me, but the constraints of time don't allow me to name them all. The book's sweet tea Black gay men of the South and Black queer Southern women and oral history, however, claim a special place for me. There you made something we would not have but for you, an oral account of the complex and rich lives of Black queer folks in the South told in their own tongues. In them, you rebutted the notion that Black communities are one-dimensionally and monolithically homophobic. About historically Black colleges and universities set in the region, you rightly observed, quote, HBCUs are campuses in which homosex is not only common, but in some cases encouraged, end quote. And as a proud graduate of Howard University, I lend my witness to this. When we first met, I did not have the benefit of your cooking, but since then I have enjoyed its delights. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the dessert party that you and Stephen hosted in your home in Chicago for years. If the god Dionysus had been Black, he would have been you. There were cakes, pies, and cookies in every room and on every floor. Hundreds of people came through that house and benefited from the sweet community that you produced there. It occurred to me recently that the world of the dessert party and the intellectual world that you have kneaded and assembled are part of the same project, the transformation of the existing world, making something different, additional, as Wanima put it. And it is fitting that you are being honored in this year especially, as the right wing has begun its outlandish assault on queer studies, feminism, critical race theory, and anti-racist Marxism. That is its assault on all of us. But we, like you, will keep cooking, teaching, reading, writing, fighting, and conjuring. For all of your wonderful ways and for the work and inspiration that come from them, I am delighted and honored to celebrate you this evening. My love from here until yonder, Rod.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Ferguson. My name is Laura Westengard. I am the co-chair of the board of directors of CLAGS, along with James Harris, who you met earlier. And it's my honor to introduce Dr. Kathy Cohen and as our second testimonial speaker. Dr. Kathy J. Cohen is the David and Mary Winton Green Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago and the inaugural chair of the new Department of Race, Diaspora, and Indigeneity. So many of you likely know that Kathy Cohen was the recipient of the Kessler Award in 2014. And she gave a talk here at CLAGS called #Do Black Lives Matter on Black Death and LGBTQ Politics. So I did my graduate work in Southern California at UC Riverside and came to New York having never lived outside of Southern California in my whole life for my tenure track position here at CUNY. I'm at New York City College of Technology, which is one of the CUNYs in downtown Brooklyn, and I'm in the English department there. And I was trying to find my home here in New York. And, you know, some people come to New York and feel at home right away. And I did not. Sometimes, you know, New York is like a slow burn, right? So about 2 years in, I found CLAGS. And I came to the 2014 Kessler with Kathy Cohen. And it was my first introduction to CLAGS. And I found my home. And it was here. And that made me feel at home in New York City. And I'm not going back to California. Sorry, Mom. So I like to think of the Kessler Award and of Kathy Cohen as the spark for my dedication to CLAGS. So I came to every single Kessler lecture since that one in 2014. I joined the board and then eventually took on the role of co-chair of the board of directors of CLAGS, and they're going to have to drag me out of here. So in one of the most important contributions to the field of queer studies, Punks, Bulldaggers, and Welfare Queens, the radical potential of queer politics, Cohen challenged the flattening of intersectional analysis in queer studies and argued that the, quote, process of movement building be rooted not in our shared history or identity, but in our shared marginal relationship to dominant power, which normalizes, legitimizes, and privileges, end quote. This attention to power and the power of coalitional work is needed now as much or maybe more than in 1997 when Kathy wrote this. So for the graduate students in the room, go read that. And Cohen's Kessler lecture has actually recently been published in the Queer Then and Now collection that Matt Brim mentioned, and that is for sale outside in the lobby with a tote bag for it to go in. And what's great about that collection is that she it republished her original Kessler, but then she also wrote a reflection on that, looking back from, that's the Queer Now part of the Queer Then and Now. And so in that reflection, she strikes a balance between productive critique and grateful acknowledgement, which I think is critical to both movement and queer studies. She writes, quote, "While there will always be challenges that movements have to face, we also must recognize how they have helped us think differently about what might be. Sometimes we must take some time to think about what has been accomplished," end quote. So this evening, we are thrilled to join you all in holding space for recognizing how E. Patrick Johnson has helped us all think differently about what might be. Kathy Cohen is unable to make it here tonight, but she has sent a video testimonial for you all, which I'm going to get started. Thank you so much.
I want to start by congratulating my dear friend, E. Patrick Johnson, on this incredible and well-deserved recognition. I can't think of anyone more deserving of this acknowledgement than you. And I'm especially sorry that I'm not able to be there in person to hear your talk and to hear the other introductory tributes. Please know that although my body is stuck here in Chicago, my heart is there with you. All right, let me start my introduction where everything starts and stops when thinking of you, namely your dessert parties. Now, for those of you who have never had the delight of attending one of E. Patrick's and Stephen's dessert parties, let me try to set the stage a bit. You walk in their house, which is really a beautiful small mansion, and whiffs from the dessert, yes, multiple desserts, greet you at the door. As you progress through the house, you are welcome in each room by a different dessert, at least one, possibly more. In the kitchen, there might be a delicious pound cake. In the living room, a yummy bread pudding. Upstairs, a tart cherry pie. And in the basement, a peach cobbler with a perfect crust. And of course, there are many different types of beverages to quench your thirst. And best of all, as you progress from room to room, eating more and more of the food cooked all by E. Patrick, you meet and engage with friends, old and new. And all that E. Patrick and Stephen ask from those of us joining in the festivities is that you bring a toy or canned goods to share with those who don't have access to the resources they need and deserve, especially during the holidays. Now, it might seem a little weird to start my tribute to an academic of E. Patrick's stature by describing his dessert party. But for me, his dessert party is the embodiment, we might say, of all he has accomplished and who he is as a person. He is someone who facilitates the creation of new connections, new ways of being, new communities, and new fields of study, while always thinking about how to leverage the resources and privilege that we have for the benefit of others with fewer resources and less power. What I have learned from E. Patrick over the years, many years of knowing each other, is that you can be brilliant and innovative and generous. You can create new fields of study and mentor students who go on to produce their own path-defining work. You can do all of this and also be kind. I want to be clear about what I mean by being kind. E. Patrick's kindness is genuine. It is authentic and intentional. It's not a kind of mindless kindness, but instead an engagement that starts by first recognizing the connection we have through our shared humanity. And it is this kind of deep commitment to seeing people's humanity that facilitates their trust in him to the point that they share their stories, they share their histories, they share their insights with him. And it is his kindness, among other things, but really his kindness, that I believe makes him a brilliant ethnographer, a brilliant theorist, and a brilliant performer. Okay, so let me say a little bit about his brilliance. You know, I was thinking about what to say, and it really does seem like yesterday that many of us were kind of struggling to have Black LGBT folks included in discussions and articles about Black communities and queer studies. Like, how would we situate ourselves? And I remember attending the Black Queer Studies in the Millennium Conference in 2000, held at the University of California, Chapel Hill, and planned and hosted by E. Patrick Johnson and May Henderson. As I looked around the room and heard the presentations of colleagues and friends such as Jackie Alexander, or Jennifer Brody, or Cheryl Clark, or Cheryl Dunier, or Sharon Holland, and Rod Ferguson, of course, I could go on, right? I really never imagined that the group assembled there would in a decade help to revolutionize our study and understanding of Black intimacy, sex, community, joy, and resistance, really helping to cement the new field of Black queer studies. And it was from that conference that E. Patrick and May produced the field-defining edited volume, Black Queer Studies, A Critical Anthology. Now, E. Patrick has, of course, gone on to have incredible success in the academy. And I don't have time to kind of list all the accolades. But through it all, he has insisted that his work never be contained to only the classroom or only the academy. He has instead found new ways to be in dialogue with the communities from where we come and those we hold most dear. If we start with his field-defining article, Quare Studies, or almost everything I know about queer studies I learned from my grandmother, we are reminded of the type of pioneering theorizing that can happen when we center the people and places often thought to be unessential to deep insights and understandings. Those communities too often silenced and ignored. E. Patrick's research has always been about engaging in those communities with respect, foregrounding his curiosity for the knowledge production happening all around him in those spaces. You can find the same instinct for producing work that amplifies the voices of those in Black gay communities in his book, Sweet Tea, Black Gay Men of the South and Oral History. His focus not only on Black gay men, but those in the South, demands that the reader geographically contextualize the racialized processes that shape being gay or queer. E. Patrick writes in the introduction to Sweet Tea that, quote, because Black queers experience their race and sexuality and class and gender in a Southern context, their relationships and experiences also diverge from those of white Southern queers. This is why it is important to account for all those particular histories, end quote. Now, never content with that kind of academic pathway for disseminating research, E. Patrick is always innovating methods, voices, and modes of communication. For example, he converted sweet tea into the stage reading Pouring Tea, Black gay men of the South tell their stories. And then he took it on the road to over 100 college campuses. He then produced a full-length stage play, Sweet Tea, the Play, which premiered in Chicago, and again took it to 8 other cities. Finally, E. Patrick agreed to serve as co-executive producer of the film Making Sweet Tea, which has received several awards. Now, I want to make sure we all know that Black women have also been a part of E. Patrick's work. Black queer women of the South were given space to tell their stories in E. Patrick's 2 books, Honey Pot, Black Southern Women Who Love Women, and Black Queer Southern Women in Oral History. Thus, kind of armed with the insights of Black people, often from the South, E. Patrick has constantly moved into the places where our folks creatively and defiantly build their families, love their communities, produce joy, and sadly, too often also resist violence. In all his work, E. Patrick helps kind of make sure that Black queer people are not just legible, but actually seen in all their beautiful complexity. Now, as we might expect, as demonstrated by this evening, the honors have begun to accumulate for E. Patrick. However, even with all the accolades, E. Patrick has remained focused on producing work that makes the field of Black queer studies relevant to a changing world and new audiences. For example, he's devoted to highlighting and supporting new generations of scholars, as he did in his edited volume, No Tea, No Shade, New Writings in Black Queer Studies. Okay, so I want to end where I started, namely with E. Patrick's principled and enduring kindness. Just one story. Stephen and E. Patrick were over for dinner. You may not remember this, but once, and my partner Beth mentioned that her birthday was coming up and that she loved cherry pie. Lo and behold, on her birthday, a few days later, E. Patrick showed up with a cherry pie he had baked. Of course, I had no cherry pie, but that's another story. Now, this may seem like a kind of simple gesture, but what I want to tell you is that there are so many people who have a similar story of E. Patrick taking time and showing up for them, whether in the academy or outside of it. For E. Patrick, the building of an academic career that allows one to be the recipient of the 2023 Kessler Award is not accomplished by neglecting or ignoring one's work to build community, to be present when people need you, and to center the stories and lives of those often represented as being marginal. He teaches us that you build a career and a life because you do both. So I want to congratulate you again, E. Patrick, on an amazing career. But more importantly, I want to thank you for being the amazing person, scholar, and friend that you are. I have learned so much from you. By not only kind of reading the incredible corpus of work you have produced, but also just watching how you move in the world. You deserve this Kessler Award and really so much more. I hope you have a great evening and know that my heart is there celebrating with you. Love you. Congratulations.
Hello, everybody. My name is Marga Weiss. I'm a board member of CLAGS, and I'm here to introduce our next and final testimonial speaker, George Chauncey. You know, here at CLAGS, we like to make you wait a little bit. I first encountered queer studies in the late 1900s, as our students say. When I was just a tiny undergraduate at the University of Chicago. It was the fall of 1993, 4 years before George started the Lesbian and Gay Studies Project with Elizabeth Povinelli, before Chicago even had a gender studies program. George, I am very certain that you would not remember me, but I remember walking across the quad after one of my problems in gender studies seminars. That's what this thing was called way back then. Realizing that this was it. I was hooked. I start with this little story to underline the enormous institutional role George Chauncey has played in establishing the field we celebrate tonight with the Kessler Award. We might all know his books, including that first one, The Groundbreaking Gay New York, Gender, Urban Culture, and the Making of the Gay Male World, 1890 to 1940, which I remember prominently displayed at the Seminary Co-op when it came out in 1994. We might also know his work as an expert witness in crucial legal cases, including Lawrence v. Texas in 2003, work that he has done since 1993. But did you know that as a graduate student in the late 1980s, he was part of the organizing committee that led to the establishment of CLAGS? From the vantage point of today, tonight, our field of queer studies might seem very well established. But back in the 80s and the 90s, George Chauncey was one of the very few historians to specialize in gay history, to treat queer history as history, a history that matters. Through his institutional work on campus and off, George has helped build this field to reclaim a gay and lesbian past. And he has made that queer past a public history, available to folks beyond the academy, a principle that we bring forward today in CLAGS. So, without further ado, I turn it over to George Chauncey, the DeWitt Clinton Professor of History at Columbia University and the Director of the Columbia Research Initiative on the Global History of Sexuality. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Please don't get too concerned. I tore a ligament in my left foot, so I've been carrying around this boot for a week. It's not pleasant, but nothing serious. And I was not about to let a torn ligament get in the way of my joining this celebration. I should talk about E. Patrick's dessert party, which truly was fantastic until he finally had made 1 or 10 or 100 cakes too many and called it to an end. But I think you've heard enough. I want to say that E. Patrick Johnson is a national treasure. Few people in the academy possess his range of talents or have had such a profound impact in so many domains. He's not only a path-breaking scholar, a dedicated and thoughtful oral historian, an incisive critic and theorist, but also a beautiful singer, mesmerizing performer. And beyond this, to borrow the anti-patriarchal term that the great gay Howard University professor Elaine Locke sometimes used for his role in fostering the Harlem Renaissance, Patrick is also a creative and essential midwife. A midwife whose dedicated mentoring of a generation of young scholars and whose editorial work and conference organizing have helped give birth, as Kathy and Rod have both said, to vital new fields of scholarly inquiry. He's had such a profound impact on the development of queer studies, performance studies, Black queer studies, and queer of color critique that none of these domains would be the same without him. So I want to acknowledge the full range of his contributions but as the historian in this trio of praise singers, I want to begin by celebrating E. Patrick Johnson's extraordinary contributions to our understanding of the queer past. As I know all too well from my research on New York City's queer history, historians most often rely on arrest records, trial records, clinical records, carceral records. In fact, we can learn a lot from such sources if we parse them carefully, and even more, of course, from the diaries and correspondence we're sometimes lucky enough to find. But as I found in my own research, nothing has greater power than oral history to illuminate the lives of people who in their today, of necessity, usually took enormous precautions to hide and protect their queer lives and social worlds from outsiders. Indeed, I often think that the most urgent task for queer historians is to gather as many oral histories as we can before the next generation passes and takes their stories with them. So the years Patrick dedicated to collecting oral histories are extraordinarily important. He's published 3 compilations and meditations based on that research: Sweet Tea, Narratives of Black Gay Men of the South in 2008, Black, Queer, Southern Women, an Oral History in 2018, and Honeypot, Black Southern Women Who Love Women in 2019. For his first book alone, Sweet Tea, he interviewed more than 70 Black, gay, and transgender Southerners, an incredibly diverse group of people from every Southern state, ranging in ages from 19 to 93, including doctors and hairdressers, clergy and farmers, business people, and the unemployed. In the book's thematically organized chapters, his narrators tell stories that provide us new insights into the way Black, gay, and genderqueer people created a place for themselves in small towns and large metropolitan areas alike, and high schools and colleges, and various occupations, and in the Black church. They give us a rich portrait of the texture of their everyday lives, the vernacular terms they deployed, the discourses of sexuality that influence their self-understanding. The interviews include devastating stories about the discrimination and hostility people sometimes faced, but their stories also reveal their resiliency, the love they found, the relationships they formed, and the joy they found in Southern Black gay life. And in the context of the larger field of LGBTQ history, which has overwhelmingly focused on the history of white residents of northern cities, Patrick's decision to focus his 3 collections on Southern Black oral history narrators, some of whom grew up on farms or small towns, does not just fill an immense gap in the scholarship, although it does, but also raises important questions about the overarching narratives, periodizations, and analytic categories developed by queer historians, and about the spatial and institutional context and settings they focused on. His work, as Kathy said, challenges widely held assumptions about the supposedly inherent homophobia of Black communities, Southern communities, and religious communities by revealing the counterintuitive acceptance many queer people found in the most unlikely quarters. Sweet Tea alone is such a treasure trove for scholars that it's been cited in more than 500 books and articles since its publication. Its stories are so compelling that Patrick was invited by more than 100 venues across the country to perform the performance piece he based on it, in which he embodied the narratives of the narrators and told their stories. Patrick's careful attention to Black Southerners' accounts of their faith and their place in the Black church points to another of his enduring contributions, which has been to urge queer studies to reject the Academy's general erasure of religion by acknowledging the enduring influence and power of religion in shaping queer culture and subjectivity. This insistence has animated much of his work, from his groundbreaking 1998 essay, Feeling the Spirit in the Dark, Expanding Notions of the Sacred in the African American Community, published 25 years ago on Callaloo, which illuminated the intimate relationship between the dance floor of a gay club and the sanctuary of a Black church, in order to insist that our theories and critiques move beyond stale dichotomies between the spiritual and the secular. Now, I've dwelt so far on a handful of Patrick's crucial scholarly interventions, but since this is a queer event, I also want to celebrate his indispensable role as a midwife. Few scholarly collections have had the transformative impact of E. Patrick's 2005 co-edited volume, Black Queer Studies, a Critical Anthology. By assembling a spectacular group of scholars, including both of my fellow celebrants, Kathy Cohen and Rod Ferguson, his volume helped consolidate the field, give it cohesion and direction, and announce its arrival with the power of a thunderclap. I could speak at length about the other collections he's edited and the foundational conferences he's organized, about his phenomenal career and service as a dean, department chair, and director of graduate studies. But instead, I want to say a word about his mentoring of individual students. He has supervised or is currently supervising more than 20 dissertations and has served on another 20 plus dissertation committees. I personally know some of his former students and have heard the warmth of their praise for him and witnessed their dedication to him. And I just want to say to all the faculty and graduate students in this room, can you imagine how many letters of recommendation this man has written? I wonder sometimes, how has he managed to do anything else? So let me conclude with a story, not about his dessert party, although those stories are legion. But back in the day when I taught at the University of Chicago, I served as a programmer on the organizing committee for a multi-year public lecture series on LGBTQ history and culture held at the Chicago History Museum. And 17 years ago, I invited Patrick to give a lecture on what we called Gays and Gospel. It was a transcendent evening. Patrick performed as much as he lectured. He wove together his own glorious renditions of gospel songs, his memories of being a young sissy in his hometown choir, a sharp historical account of the place of queer people in the creation of gospel music, and an astute sociological analysis of the role of Black gay men in gospel choirs. It was a tour de force, and it electrified the packed auditorium. And I remember thinking, as I sat there watching him that evening, that he was the only person I knew in the academy or beyond who could pull off such an audacious, multi-talented, and multi-texture lecture come performance. E. Patrick Johnson is one of a kind, a national treasure, and I would add with Kathy, one of the kindest men I know, and a total sweetheart. And I love him for it. Thank you.
Okay, the time has come. The pleasure has been deferred as long as we could. In honor of the work that he has done in LGBTQ studies, CLAG presents E. Patrick Johnson this plaque, which reads,
The 2023 Kessler Award is presented to E. Patrick Johnson for this contribution to the field of LGBTQ studies. Please.
It's really hard. As many a Black person has stated at events such as these, I'm full of emotion, full of gratitude, and full of humility. One should never do the work that they do to be thanked or honored. You do the work in hope that it does good in the world and that it might touch someone in ways big and small. But in the event that you do receive word that your work has made some impact, it feels great and motivates you to keep doing the work. My sincere thanks to Matt Brim, whom I adore and whose brave work has been inspiring, and to the CLAGS board for bestowing this honor upon me. I'm so grateful. To George, to Rod, to Kathy, who couldn't be with us, thank you for your unwavering friendship. We do this work in community, and you three are not only a part of my queer community, you are a part of my chosen family. Rod and I even share the same birthday, so we are literally twins. Thanks to the CLAGS staff who work behind the scenes to make this event happen, and to all my former students, friends, and colleagues who've traveled here to be in attendance, and those who may be listening online. To my husband, my ride or die, Stephen Lewis, thank you for these past 25 years of making it possible for me to do this work, from driving folks to and from airports at conferences, to creating the indexes for my books, to always stepping in to support me sometimes at the last minute so that I can shine. I love you. And finally, thank you to my grandmother, Mary Lewis Adams, for making a way out of no way so that I could be standing here today. This lecture is for her. My talk today is titled Quare Studies, a Postscript, in which I'll meditate on my 2001 essay, Queer Studies Are Almost Everything I Know About Queer Studies I Learned from My Grandmother. The Kessler lecture provided me the occasion to re-examine some of the ideas I presented in that essay, an essay that has become one of my most oft-cited pieces of scholarly writing, and that has spawned a cadre of riffs on the idea of queer, from the Quare Square Collective, a nonprofit arts organization started in Chicago, and Black Quare, a Black queer student group at UC Santa Barbara, to scholarly engagements with the work through books such as Jennifer Suzanne Leeds' recently published Black, Quare, and Then to Where, Theories of Justice and Black Sexual Ethics, published by Duke University Press, or Brazilian scholar Fernando Luis de Moraes' book, Analítica Queer, Como Ler o Humano, Queer Analytics, How to Read the Human, in which he engages queer relative to Brazilian sexuality studies, and in which he includes a translation of queer studies in Portuguese, the whole entire article he translated. Who knew that queer would, as my good friend, Reverend Pastor Duncan Teague would say, kick up so much dust? But as with all publications, thinking evolves, as does the field. My motivation for writing the essay was due to my genuine frustration by what at the time felt like a silencing of my experience of being Black, Southern, working class, and a list of adjectives as much as nouns that also swirled around my queerness. Queer theory was liberating in many ways because it was providing me a cute vocabulary to impress my colleagues who were always dubious about my ability to grasp theory with a capital T. But what queer theory was not giving me was a way to talk to Mama Nim. Miss Geneva, Aunt Mary Lee, Uncle Boot, Uncle Johnny, Reverend Lytle, Miss Hoyle, Deacon Roscoe Connor, Mama Kate, and a host of other folks in my family, extended family, community, or church, all of whom had been and continue to be involved in freedom struggles of various kinds, and none of whom identified as queer. In addition to not being an adequate descriptor of my experience of Black people's complicated history of sex and sexuality, queer was also not a nuanced way of understanding how race, class, and gender are embodied relative to sexuality. The fact that my Uncle Johnny's female philandering, for example, was also the very thing that made him queer, compelled him to engage in non-normative sex with the woman he described as half and half, because she had sex with both men and women. After learning of Uncle Johnny's transgression, his sister, my Aunt Mary Lee, inquired how it was possible that he could be intimate with a woman who was half and half. To which he replies, "I was with the half I could be with." Queer theory at the time gave me nothing to wrestle with the notion of two homophobic family members, my Aunt Mary Lee and my Uncle Johnny, celebrating the pleasure, the jouissance, if you will, of queer sex. Rather, queer theory and politics would solely have me kick them to the curb based on their homophobia, as opposed to take a deeper dive into the ways in which race and class might enable a different strategy of sexual liberation. So this is the backdrop for how Quare came to be. But there's also a broader historical context that was going on in the academy as well. I was a graduate student in the early 90s, and theory was all the rage. French philosophy had taken hold, and if you could not keep up, then you were left behind. So many of us would pretend until times got better. Or we tried to, as Farrah Griffin has admonished us to do, read until you understand. Despite the angst, it was also an exciting time to be a graduate student, learning all these big words and engaging these big ideas, and we thought we could change the world. Most exciting for young queer scholars, of course, was the fomenting field of queer studies, because it was legitimizing discussions of sexuality in the academy. The 90s was also the decade of shade. If you thought the current moment of shade throwing is rough because of social media, well, you should travel back to the 90s. No, we did not have TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, or whatever it's being called these days, and all the other social media platforms, but we did have the almighty pen. And whereas an Instagram story may be up for 24 hours, a journal article putting someone on blast exists for you to return to day after day, year after year. There for us to dissect years later in our classes or for our own popcorn eating pleasure. The controversy du jour during this period was the relationship between women's studies, soon to transition to a number of configurations, including women's and gender studies, women's studies and sexuality studies, or simply queer studies, and queer studies. Concomitantly, there was also a persistent backlash against identity politics, particularly in the wake of new theories that called into question the notion of a unified subject. And these theories were emerging within the context of queer theory. Mind you, I was an undergraduate in the 80s who had been baptized in women of color, lesbian, feminist writings. My copies of This Bridge Call My Back. But some of us are brave. The Combahee River Collective Statement of 1977, Home Girls, For Colored Girls, and Hey Girl. were tattered, and my secret, hidden away copies of In the Life, Brother to Brother, Conditions, and Other Countries were also tattered and sticky pages. But when queer theory began to explode the notion of identity with a capital I, as a graduate student of the 90s who desperately wanted to appear hip, smart, and modern, I got caught up in the centrifugal forces of academic ambition, while deep within knowing that I had to stay connected to Mama now. In 1993, I arrived at Amherst College as a 5-college dissertation fellow housed in the English department, where I would 2 years later go onto the tenure track. You can read about that drama in another article that I wrote. In the same year, 1993, my senior colleague, Michelle Barali, co-edited a volume with Henry A. Love and David Halperin, The Lesbian and Gay Studies Reader, which appeared in 1993. The publication of this collection was a watershed moment for the burgeoning field of sexuality studies. It also brought to fore the cleavages among scholars of gender and women's studies and scholars of sexuality studies, or what would become queer studies. And as with any first, there were blind spots, omissions, and oversights, all of which were called out with a quickness. The very next year, 1994, Differences, a journal of feminist cultural studies, published a 2-issue volume entitled More Gender Trouble: Feminism Meets Queer Theory. This double issue included several essays by leading feminist scholars, including Judith Butler herself, whose introduction to the special issue was titled Against Proper Objects. An ironic twist given the Abelov, Barali, Halperin reader was the proper object of attention of Butler's essay. Butler spends more than a few paragraphs at the very beginning of the essay pointing out how Abelov, Barali, and Halperin methodologically conflate sex with gender, and more importantly, that the editors erroneously position gender as the proper object of feminism and sex as the proper object of lesbian gay studies. Butler writes, quote, "Whereas the editors of the Lesbian and Gay Studies Reader are right to claim in the introduction to their reprinting of Thinking Sex that feminism does not and cannot provide by itself a full explanation for the oppression of sexual minorities, they do not supply any grounds for the claim that lesbian and gay studies can provide by itself a more appropriate framework for the analysis of sexual minorities," end quote. Now don't get it twisted. This is shade, but it's low-key shade, a hit it and quit it kind of shade. Butler doesn't go in. She makes her case and moves on. But in the same volume, my big sis, Evelyn Hammonds, goes in, signaling with the title, Black Holes and the Geometry of Black Female Sexuality. Hammond's shade had been festering for some time. I quote her at length. When asked to write for the second special issue of Differences on Queer Theory, I must admit I was at first hesitant even to entertain the idea. Though much of what is now called queer theory I find engaging and intellectually stimulating, I found the idea of writing about it disturbing. When I am asked if I am queer, I usually answer yes, even though the ways in which I am queer have never been articulated in the body of work that is now called queer theory. Where should I begin? I ask myself. Do I have to start by adding another adjective to my already long list of self-chosen identities? I used to be a Black lesbian feminist, writer, scientist, historian of science, and activist. Now would I be a Black queer feminist, writer, scientist, historian of science, and activist? Given the rapidity with which new appellations are created, I wonder if if my new list would still be up to date by the time the article came out. More importantly, does this change or any change I might make to my list convey to anyone the ways in which I am queer? Even, she goes in. Even a cursory reading of the first issue of Differences on Queer Theory or a close reading of the Lesbian and Gay Studies Reader, by now biblical in status. See, that's shade, y'all. Would lead me to answer no. So what would be the point of my writing for a second issue on queer theory? Well, I could perform that by now familiar act taken by Black feminists and offer a critique of every white feminist for her failure to articulate a conception of a racialized sexuality. I could argue that while it has been acknowledged that race is not simply additive to or derivative of sexual difference, few white feminists have attempted to move beyond simply stating this point to describe the powerful effect that race has on the construction and representation of gender and sexuality. I could go further and note that even when race is mentioned, it is a limited notion devoid of complexities. Sometimes it is reduced to biology and oftentimes referred to as a social construction. Rarely is it used as a global sign, a meta language, as the ultimate trope of difference, arbitrarily contrived to produce and maintain relations of power and subordination. If I were to make this argument, this is still Evelyn. If I were to make this argument, I wonder under what subheading such an article would appear in the Lesbian and Gay Studies Reader, assuming, of course, that they would want to include it in a second edition. How about politics and sex? Well, it would certainly be political, but what would anyone learn about sex from it? As I look at my choices, I see that I would want my article to appear in the section Subjectivity, Discipline, and Resistance. But where would I situate myself in the group of essays that discuss lesbian experience, lesbian identity, gender insubordination, and butch femme aesthetics? Perhaps they wouldn't want a reprint after all, and I'd be off the hook. Maybe I just hit one of those constructed silences that Teresa de la Redis wrote about as one of the problems in lesbian and gay studies. This is the kind of shade that make you bob and weave while you're reading it on the page. And it helps you understand how I, as a new assistant professor, was having to navigate in the space between, among, and outside the various camps of gender and queer studies in the academy, while also attending to the very absence of any race or class analysis. And then in 1997, Kathy Cohen published Punks, Bulldaggers, and Welfare Queens in GLQ. That essay was a game changer for me and for so many others, as we've heard tonight, who were trying to articulate what we all felt but couldn't put into words. After reading Punks, the wheels started turning about how I might make the same intervention, but from the perspective of my own disciplinary home of performance studies. It initially occurred to me to create a performance that would engage questions of sexual identity, race, and class, which did become a one-person show called Strange Fruit that I toured around the country from 1998 to 2000. But that show was less about the field of queer studies and more about my personal journey of being Black and gay in the academy. What I had to say about queer studies, on the other hand, needed to be shared in a traditional publication, as I had learned from Evelyn, so that folks could return to it, so that it could become a part of the official record of sexuality studies, and of course, an opportunity to throw some shade. My first draft of the essay came in the form of a job talk. I went on the job market in 1999 because I knew that I had to leave Amherst. Again, y'all can read about it in another essay I wrote. I got 3 campus visits that year: UC San Diego, Georgia Tech, and Northwestern. Y'all know where I ended up. My first talk was at UC San Diego for a joint position between English and theater. Lisa Lowe was the chair of the English department at the time, and there was a powerhouse faculty, including Jack Halberstam, Rosemary George, God rest her soul, Daphne Brooks, and Rod Ferguson was a PhD student in sociology who happened to attend the talk. I remember vividly after dinner, Jack Halberstam saying to me, "Great presentation, but I have to say I was wondering where you were going at the beginning of the talk when you were referring to limbs being cut off and being called out your name." Though I did not get the job, I did receive some great feedback. I continued to develop the essay before submitting it to Text and Performance Quarterly, where it got a revise and resubmit. While the reviewers were sympathetic to the arguments of the essay, they felt it was a bit too harsh on scholar John Champagne, and that I needed to provide an example of what a queer reading might look like. I did not oblige them on the former request, but regarding the latter, I did include a queer reading of Marlon Riggs' film, Black Is, Black Ain't. The revised essay was accepted and then published in the first issue of 2001. I must pause here to say that I believe in growth and redemption, and that extends to everyone. Notably, my, by then, former senior colleague, Michelle Barali, of the lesbian and gay reader fame, was one of my most helpful readers of Quare. The lesson here is that we never are the sum total of our last blind spot riddled publication. I provide you with this long, circuitous, perhaps tangential history of the publication to provide much needed context for what I have to say about it now. I believe in the African symbol of Sankofa, that we must look back as we move forward. With Quare, I was hoping to speak to issues of embodiment as they relate to sexual desire, politics, and representation within the context of racial and class formations. Little did I know that I was still a few years from accessing knowledges that would crystallize what I had been thinking all along in Quare. It all became clear, however, when I began the research for Sweet Tea, Black Gay Men of the South and Oral History, and began bearing witness to the narratives of folks whose lives were an enactment of Quare. Their stories were followed by those collected in Black queer Southern Women and Oral History. Indeed, the narratives of both these texts were an aha moment for me as they threw shade on the theory apartheid I had witnessed in the academy, as these folks theorized from below, moving the discussion from the podium to the porch, from the conference room to the living room, and from the faculty meeting to the house party. They were the embodiment of theories in the flesh that Anzaldúa and Moraga discussed. For the rest of my time then, I want to revisit some of what I wrote in Quare and demonstrate through performance how my interlocutors instantiate Quare theory. It's 2004. I'm home for Mother's Day weekend and sitting in the congregation of the church I attended as a child. The mass choir is singing, the choir that basically is a combination of the 5 choirs at the church. In the tenor section, there is a man in a 3-piece suit, permed, shoulder-length hair, arched eyebrows, and what appears to be a thin layer of foundation. "Who is that?" I whisper in my childhood friend's ear. "Who?" she responds. "That guy in the tenor section with the hair." "Oh, child, that's just Charles Danner. Today, he's Charles, but most time we call him Chaz, because if you go up to the barbershop tomorrow, he'll be wearing a dress." Fast forward 4 months. With a voice pitched somewhere between Harvey Firestein and Marilyn Monroe, Chaz chastises me for not allowing her to wash and condition my head. Fully aware of the double entendre intended, I blush and reply, now, Chaz, you know I wash and condition my own head. Now, it is Chaz who is blushing, but quips, well, that's not what I heard. This flirtatious dance with words continues until my mother asks me to run an errand for her, and Chaz asks to tag along. And so Chaz, hair coiffed, face beat back into her temples, wearing black open-toe sandals to feature her French manicured toenails, donning black leather pants and an off-the-shoulder pink mohair sweater, accompanies me to the grocery store to get some things for my mother. For Chaz, these two images of self-presentation are not contradictory or even spawned by confusion about who Chaz is. Rather, Chaz has agency over how and when the gender presentation that is most comfortable or advantageous will appear. Assigned male at birth, Charles was born in Newton, North Carolina in 1969. At the time of the interview in 2004, Chaz presented as male on Sunday to sing in the church choir and presented as female Monday through Saturday while working at a beauty salon as a hairdresser. Chaz identified as trans, but answered to all pronouns. On occasion, Chastity, Chaz's alter ego female impersonation character, performed at a local gay bar. Because of these multiple forms of gender self-presentation, Chaz's narrative offers an opportunity to think queerly about gender, race, class, and sexuality. Here is a picture of Charles as a teenager transitioning to Chaz. Here, in his own words, he names his sexuality.
I was very introverted as a child. Did not have a lot of friends, a lot of times because of my indifference. Indifference meaning my sexual orientation. I was very introverted
More
as
than
a child.
just an innocent malapropism. Rather a willful redeployment of difference as indifference. Indeed, the equation of sexual orientation with disinterest. Chaz's characterization of sexual difference as sexual indifference is key to how Chaz divests sexuality of its normatizing power. In the interview, Chaz tells me, for the longest time, I always knew there was something different about me. I always knew that when I would disrobe that I was quote unquote a male. But my mother never hesitated to remind me that she has 2 sons, but I was always very effeminate in my nature. I would go to church when churches would have the choir anniversaries, and I loved being there. I was raised in church. I love gospel music. And it was only one of the times when I felt quote unquote secure and safe to go and not to be judged and not to be ostracized or overly criticized because of my indifference. Because when I went in high drag, baby. High drag is when you really just dress to the nines, so to speak. As far as your hair, your makeup, no detail was left undone, unaddressed. And I had the lavishly sculpted nails and the pedicures and then the custom tailored suits and the very nicely coiffed wigs and the hair pieces and the makeup that looked like it was airbrushed on. So when I went into a building, albeit a room, a church, or the mall, or a store, even a doctor's office, a lot of the people, especially the children, would see something, but they weren't sure what they were seeing because here was this 5'11" woman, very statuesque, large feet, large hands, but very immaculately dressed and very polished. It was almost too good to be true. No natural woman would look that good and pays that particular attention to detail. I also went to work in full drag, baby. Sometimes my skirts were so short, I couldn't bend over to pick up the combs. And I worked in a salon that was close to a barbershop. And the only thing that separated us was a wall, a partition. And a lot of times the men from the barbershop would come over just to see what I was wearing that particular day. But a lot of the times, because of the mentality of the people, they would say, oh, that's not a woman, you know, that's just Chaz. Or the people would say, oh, that's not really a girl, you know. And they would try to call you out, so to speak. But that was because they didn't understand. So little by little, I began to educate my clients. And whoever would give me the time of day, I would let them know the difference, that I was not a cross-dresser. I was not a sissy nor their faggot, because everyone does not want to be in the box. Everyone does not want to continue on the path of being insecure and being ignorant, because knowledge is power. And the only thing that the only way that something can harm you or threaten you is when you're unsure or unaware of exactly how it works. And the fact that I wore makeup and carried myself as a female, I think in a lot of ways gave them that much more insurance that I was going to make them look their best, because I paid particular attention to detail and was always considered a perfectionist. And so I would not misrepresent my clients. And I would always tell them, I'm not going to give you a hairstyle that I would be uncomfortable wearing. Chaz is not necessarily interested in passing as a woman, yet is committed to appearing flawless to indicate her attention to detail when embodying femininity. Never disavowing her transgenderism, Chaz nonetheless does not fully commit to passing and enjoys the confusion that her appearance solicits. Chaz's goal is to fail, literally to call attention to the artifice of all gender performance. This is noted when she says, no natural woman looks that good or pays that particular attention to detail. Her line is also a read to all natural women, for sure, but it is also gender theorizing in the flesh. What is also interesting about Chaz's story is her relationship to the people in her community. Chaz feels comfortable and safe, in her words, in her church. On Sundays, everyone accepts him as Charles, but know that on Monday, Chaz will appear at the barbershop in a dress. Indeed, the townspeople don't see a man or a woman, they see Chaz, an appropriately gender-neutral name. Chaz enjoys the liminality that gender performativity affords her within the confines of a small town community. Passing is not the goal, but rather respect for his gender expression and his expertise as a hairstylist. Like Edward, the neighborhood sissy and choir director of Rod Ferguson's childhood in Manchester, Georgia. And if you haven't read Sissies at the Picnic, go read it, Rod Ferguson. Chaz is a valued member of his community, despite his indifference, and because he pays particular attention to detail when hairstyling. On the one hand, Chaz is a spectacle who attracts gawkers from the barbershop next door who come in just to see what she's wearing that particular day. Their gaze, however, is not only couched in transphobic curiosity, but also potentially desire, as Chaz deliberately wears short skirts that keeps her from bending over. Chaz also uses the occasion as a pedagogical moment to educate her clients about transgenderism, declaring he is not a cross-dresser, a sissy, or a faggot. As he says, not everyone wants to be in the box, a deliberate play on words to signify simultaneously being constrained, being ignorant, or being in a man's pants. His pedagogy manifests through his dress and makeup as well. His attention to detail, which also happens to be the same name as the salon at which he works, is displayed on his own body as gender performativity. Again, calling attention to the artifice of gender, he teaches his clients how to be a woman, regardless of biological sex. Although he never went to college and has never heard of Foucault, he declares that knowledge is power, a power that she has acquired through educating herself and others about gender nonconformity. In a brilliant example of gender theory from below, Chaz narrates her reason for not getting bottom or top surgery. I felt that once the doctors would have done the reassignment, meaning that the physical reconstructing of my body, the only thing that they would not have been able to tamper with was my essence, who I am as a person, you know. Yes, Charles would have been no more, but chastity always has been and always will be. Chastity, I do believe, was here before Charles was. And the one thing that the surgery would not have been able to change was that very fact. And why should I put myself at risk of losing my life on a surgeon's table to appease others? And would it have really appeased them? Like I said, I had to become comfortable within the skin that I was in and realizing and knowing that a physical change wasn't going to change who I was mentally. It might soften the blow for you to say, well, shit, at least she looks like a natural woman now. She's got natural looking breasts and she's got a vagina and she has soft, smooth skin or long flowing hair. But does that truly constitute being a woman? Or does a penis and physical and facial hair and muscular build or physique truly constitute masculinity? And the only one that can decide that is yourself. And I had to learn to be content with whom God had birthed me to be. And he gives us free reign over our lives as far as the choices that we make and how we govern ourselves. So I can be whomever I choose to be. I can put on the elaborate ball gowns and the most coiffed coiffures and be every bit of chastity that I dare to be. But it doesn't change the fact of who I am to him. Not only does he come to the realization that choosing to live solely on one end of the gender spectrum is untenable, but also that it is not what God would have him do. Chaz is in the middle ground for both Charles and chastity, a place from around which multiple gender presentations may pivot. Moreover, Chaz's religious revelation not only allows him to reconcile his sexuality and his spirituality, but also her transgenderism with her male body. Reassignment surgery, she rationalizes, will not fundamentally change who she is or make her feel better. On the other hand, it might bring many other complications with it, like the loss of life. More importantly, however, is how Chaz theorizes in Butlerian fashion the distinction between gender and sex. Remember Butler's read of Abela, Barali, and Halperin. She questions if a vagina and long hair constitute being a woman, or penis and facial hair constitute masculinity, and declares that the answers to those questions reside in that space where biology and discourse are in dialogic tension. Chaz proclaims, I had to learn to be content with whom God birthed me to be, and he gives us free reign over our lives as far as the choices that we make and how we govern ourselves. Chaz's declaration explicitly names the paradox of being content with whom God birthed him to be and being granted free reign over the choices that we make with that birthright, that old biology versus construction knot. But rather than being stuck in that binary, Chaz engages the boundarylessness of gender. For Chaz, that means having freedom to move within and around multiple gender embodiments. Chaz's expression of gender is what E. Sedgwick theorizes as threshold effects, those, quote, places where quantitative increments along one dimension can suddenly appear as qualitative differences somewhere else on the map entirely, end quote. Chaz's conviction that the core of who we are, our bare bones, is also something that is ever evolving. And as soon as we try to fix it in one place, we paradoxically lose our essence. For me, Chaz's quotidian theory of gender is grounded in their very material reality of living in a small Southern town as a working class beautician whose sexual indifference and gender presentation are an example of queer politics embodied. Another example of queer theorizing of gender and sexuality comes from Ida May. Born in Odenville, Alabama in 1951, Ida May's gender embodiment evolved over time. But from an early age, she understood her attraction to older feminine women, especially her Sunday school teachers.
I can remember going to Sunday school because Pauline, what her name was, Pauline Maiden? She wore emerald 4-inch heels. I can remember going to Sunday school because Pauline, them damn stockings. I had to go to Sunday school just so I could see her. Her red lipstick on and her emerald pumps or whatever color pumps she wanted to wear. I remember Miss Anderson. She had a nice waistline and a big ass. And she used to wear this big old fat belt with these skirts, these pencil skirts that come down to there. And she had its waist cinched in, them big old tits, and usually a cow collar or some shit. And I'd be looking at her, you know what I'm saying? Miss Underwood, Miss Anderson, all these were fine teachers. When my daddy checked me out that school, I was like, I want to see these teachers somehow, you know?
Despite her desire for high femme teachers, it is also the conventions of gender associated with the teaching profession that keep her from pursuing becoming a teacher. She tells me, I didn't want to teach because I didn't want to conform. This whole thing was killing me. This being a girl thing, you know? My mom used to make me wear these long line bras. It was this bra you put on back in the day that come down to here. This was before Spanx, okay? Then they had the metal stays in it. Then you had that damn girdle on. It came down to here, down about around your waist. And it had metal stays, and then it had a zip on the side, and you hooked that to some shit, and, you know, suck it in. It was crazy. You know what I'm saying? But that was the way women dressed, and there was no pantyhose. We had stockings. We put them up, and we hooked them to some shit. So it was like, I hated it. I just couldn't conform. I remember I went to, when I first went to Miles College, we always used to wear dresses. And I was a big girl all my life. I mean, really, I maxed out about 400, tell you the truth. So when I went to Miles, I was about 350, 400. I was a big girl. I had these shifts. My mom would always buy these shifts for me. And I remember I was standing out there in these little spoon heels. And I was so fat that they would the fat was sticking out off the side because they had a little gap on the side, and they were squishing every time you take a step. You that now I'm being. I was the most miserable girl in freshman year of college, and I had no pants. My father did not allow me to wear no pants, so I had no pants. So I had them shifts every damn day and that long line girdle and bra. It was killing me. It was killing me. The kids in school would call me church girl. I didn't know that they was calling me that behind my back. Then one day I was sitting in front of the student union. I was sitting up there. I was so uncomfortable trying to read a book, just trying to fit in the goddamn way I could, excuse my language. And I'm sitting, and this guy came, he sat beside me. I still say he saved my life. His name was Frederick. Everybody laughed or looked at or paid attention to Frederick because he had this perm hair. And he had this big head of hair that just permed like a woman. And he had this shirt tied up under his titties. And he had these cut off blue jeans. And they were so short you could see the pockets. And he had these little sandals. He came up there, how you doing, church girl? And I'm like, what the fuck, you know? I mean, nobody ever bothered to speak to me. I was just some strange motherfucker walking around. So anyway, I met Frederick, and Frederick sat down. He said, church girl, what you up to? I didn't say much to him. Every day we would meet there and we developed a little friendship. So he got a job with the work study, and it was working with kids outside. So I showed up at 4 o'clock to start my new job. I had on them shifts and them same little teaspoon shoes. Frederick said, where you going? I said, I come here to work. He said, oh no, honey, we hitting balls and bats and shit. You can't be out here. I said, well, I ain't got no pants. He said, come on. He took me to Kmart and bought me my first pair of jeans. He bought me a pair of bucks and a shirt and a denim jacket. I went back to school. My titties were so free. When I started taking off all that stuff, he was like, whoa, you know, he was just cutting up. Where'd you get all that stuff? He just cutting up. He turned out to be my best friend. Ida May and Frederick's friendship is an example of how gender nonconformists negotiate class and intracultural politics. As two genderqueers at a conservative HBCU in the Deep South in the early 1970s, Frederick and Ida Mae forge a path to push back against the Black respectability politics of their campus. Like Charles, Frederick risks being laughed at with his permed hair and cut-off blue jean shorts, but insists on instantiating his gender embodiment through a sartorial performance of high femme. Interestingly, however, he also aids Ida Mae in freeing her titties from the constraints of a long line bra, girdles, and her feet from teaspoon heels on a path to her preferred gender embodiment through her new pair of Bucks from Kmart. Their sartorial performance of gender nonconformity then is grounded in a working class aesthetic, cut-off jeans and Bucks from Kmart, against the backdrop of a conservative, middle-class strictures of Black respectability politics at a place like Miles College. Their transgressions withstanding, what is also important to note, however, is that the community at Miles College campus absorbs their gender nonconformity into its cultural milieu. Indeed, Charles, Frederick, and Ida Mae's coexistence and incorporation into their communities exemplifies the queer versus queer politics of Black folk, whereby transgressive sexual and gender expression are not necessarily disavowed. Near the end of Quare, I write, quote, it's weird quoting yourself, ain't it? Nonetheless, here I go. Home place is also a site which queer praxis must critique. That is, we may seek refuge in home place as a marginally safe place to critique oppression outside its confines, but we must also deploy queer theory to address oppression within home place itself, end quote, myself. Well, one of the most strident voices of critique from my interviews in Sweet Tea comes from RDNO, a pseudonym for a narrator born in Florida, in the Florida Panhandle in 1963. Here's just a snippet of his thoughts on the Black church's exploitation of queer labor.
Because I will not tolerate being castigated and then asked to sing a solo. And it's almost a way of atonement, like, I know that you don't like what I'm doing, but listen to me sing. It's almost like bribery. You let me in, you let me be a part of the community, and I will grant you this service. And I come from a different cloth. I say, if you don't like my packaging but want my gifts, you should be granted neither.
This excerpt was during a less animated part of the interview. As our conversation wore on, RDNO became more impassioned, with him definitely critiquing the Black community's participation in the marginalization of queer lives. The African American community does not hate gay people. We hate people who we think are gay. We don't ostracize gay folk, we never have. And if they're rich enough, we'll make excuses for them. And if they have children, we'll make excuses for them. The only reason why you have this very racist, sexist notion of the down low brother, and I will explain that, is because of HIV. In fact, we invented, well, it's not invented, it's called a closeted person, and that's been going on since way back when. But we all but told folks, be in the closet. We don't care what you do, just get married, have some children, adopt if necessary. It sounds like we're talking about a Supreme Court Justice nominee. But we invented that, and I will state this. I always hear Oprah say, well, why don't you be honest? Well, what incentive is there to be honest? There is no incentive of being honest, zero. I love to tell this. First of all, let's go back. It's racist because we assume that only African-American men are down low brothers, that they're the only ones that are cheating on women with other men. That's racist and stupid. Obviously, it can't be just the Black men with all the white men who want the big Black dick. Obviously, that's not the case. But it's also sexist because we assume that women do not marry to hide their sexual identity. And as far as the issue of HIV, I cannot tell you how many sisters have told brothers, why are you wearing a condom? You must be a punk. Take ownership. You want to know why I can't trust this man? My worldview is assuming everybody is HIV positive and conduct yourself accordingly. Conduct yourself accordingly. I mean, nobody's telling you not to use condoms. Well, he doesn't act this way. Well, why would he? You're going to ostracize him because this, that, or the other. So he does exactly what you say. Well, we don't mind you being gay. Just don't be the flaming guy. So you give them what they want and you're mad about it. I mean, you're the lie that the lie produced. Don't get mad at the person evolved into the lie that you told them to produce. If you don't want a dog, don't raise a puppy. You want the truth, then you start the truth at the beginning. This idea of down low brothers causing AIDS, no one told you to spread your legs and have unprotected sex. Nobody made you do that unless in case of rape. No one made you do that, nobody. And sisters need to take ownership. I would love to speak to them. In fact, I have. I said, why are so many of you have told brothers who are willing to be responsible, if you use a condom, you must be a punk? And a few of the brothers I know said, well, I can get it from somewhere else. Number one, I can't afford a child. Number two, I don't know what you have. And number three, maybe I'll just get some baby oil and call it a day. You know, they have said that. Where are those comments on Oprah? Where is that written? And the African American community is going to have to decide, do you really want to be honest about these issues or not? And right now they're being academically dishonest and people are dying. You know, that's the tragedy. You know, ACT UP says silence equals death. I think that lying equals death in the African American community. And I think it's a sin that the Black church does not have an AIDS ministry. It's a sin. Everybody want to talk about Christ and deities, but I happen to have read that book, that 66 volume book, a few times. Yes, I actually read it. Didn't just sit on a desk and collect dust and have people's birth certificates in it. I actually read it a few times. And I remember that deity said, feed me. If you love me, feed my sheep. Take care of my sheep. And it also said in Matthew 25:40, whatsoever you do to the least of these, you do unto me. So that person that is singing in the choir that might develop purple spots in 2 or 3 years is still a part of, not a party, but a part of the African American community. And we're going to have to be very honest. I mean, we can't even call it AIDS. We call it the ninja. Or they'll say, you know, that's usually the term for AIDS, the ninja. Or they'll say, ooh, he said, ooh, he said. And you can tell by the voice inflection, like you know what it is. I mean, I'm just waiting for someone to say, oh, he's got ROLAIDS. I'm just waiting for that one to come out. But I mean, that's what we have here, is a lot of dishonesty. In one fell, thank you. In one fell swoop, RDNO delivers a devastating critique of Black religious institutions, pointing out the hypocrisy of its alleged alignment with Judeo-Christian scripture, while disavowing the very practice of those principles when it comes to taking care of its queer sheep who are afflicted with AIDS. But he also demands personal accountability for one's sexual safety, as he says he has told folks to take ownership and conduct yourself accordingly. RDNO reads everyone for filth with no apologies, but it comes from a Quare politic, especially because his critique foregrounds the political economy of sexual politics within white supremacy. These are just 3 examples of the over 100 shared with me over the past 20 years that exemplify Quare theorizing and politics. Indeed, they reflect the theories of the flesh that continue to inform the theories and politics that gave rise to the subfield of Black queer studies, and that continue to push those of us in the academy to think more capaciously and radically about how we produce the work that we do and that inform our politics. For me, Quare was meant as a manifesto, drawing on the traditions of women of color, lesbian feminism, as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk. My naivete, or blind spot, as it were, was that Quare was always already being practiced in the daily lives of Black, queer, Southern dissidents. But if I'm being totally honest, I was hoping that Quare would become an analytic taken up in the academy, and it did. The ways in which a younger generation has employed Quare has been fascinating to watch as they use it to speak to the current conversations occurring in the academy and attributing things to Quare that make it sound grander than it is. Brian Horton, an assistant professor and cultural anthropologist at Brandeis, had this to say about the essay. EPJs, that's what they call me these days, EPJ. EPJ's Quare studies is a revelation for its centering of materiality, flesh to theory. This playful and ingenious riff on queer via his use of the term quare is a call for grounding theory, not just in materiality, but also in the nuances of race and class, which shade universality with the inflections of particular experiences. Quare for Johnson is instructive not just because it displaces the grand narratives of queer theory, but because it demands that scholars attend to performance, to the microscopic things we might do with our bodies. This attention not only has the power to reshape what theory in the academy looks like, but also brings the seemingly frivolous, the unserious, and the disregarded into the center of conversation. Okay, Dr. Horton, I see you. You better make me sound smart. In all seriousness, the next generation of queer scholars of color will do what they do with Quare, both proponents and detractors alike. The point is that 20 years later, Quare is still sparking conversation about how we examine the fullness and complexity of our humanity. As you all know, Quare emerged from a conversation that I recalled having with my grandmother about her neighbor, David, whom she believed to be queer because of his gardening, housekeeping, and baking skills. Despite the fact that she threw away every pie he baked for her and did not allow me to eat them either. Still, well, let me go back. Still, it's like you don't eat everybody's potato salad. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. Still, David's sweet gestures bonded my grandmother to him in a way that deepened their friendship up until his death, a decade before her own transition. It was also a lesson for me in coalitional politics across difference. David was a white queer man, and my grandmother, a Black straight woman, whose relationship was bound by them living as neighbors in public housing for senior citizens in a small town in North Carolina. And so I close my remarks today, lost in the reveries of shelling peas, shucking corn, and throwing shade at the neighbors, while sitting on the front porch with my grandmother, knowing that this, all of it, is what queer politics are all about. Thank you. Thank you.